You may be familiar with the custom that it seems like every year there's something to add to our Seder plates. Maybe you have an orange every year, maybe you have olives, maybe you have a coffee beans. There's all kinds of things. There's a wide variety. And I was thinking about something else to add, and on Wednesday, I came across this. This was shared by one of the rabbis at Temple Israel in West Bloomfield, Michigan. This Passover, we're adding something new to our Seder plates, a single Lego block. A Lego is a child's toy. It represents the innocence that was threatened and the lives that were protected. It represents our creativity, our strength, and the sacred work of putting the pieces back together again. Because if anyone knows what it means to rebuild and come out stronger, it is us. That is the story we tell every Passover. That is the story we are living right now. One piece connects to another, something new takes shape, something even more precious and sacred than what came before. So place a Lego on your Seder plate this year for our kids and for our teachers, for our community, and for the future that we are building together. If you have chills, I do too. I had them when I first read this, and as I read it aloud now, imagining, as I'm sure we all saw those photos of children's preschool tables that were evacuated, little plates of raisins and Cheerios, Legos that were being played with when the alarm sounded. It reminds us of what we are all doing together, what we're fighting for. It reminds us of everything that can be, shall we say, destroyed, and everything that always can be rebuilt. Let's take a few moments to pray in silence. Proud moms, it doesn't matter how old you are. There is a saying that the East Coast does not have 4 seasons, but 12. There is summer, then unbearable August, then fake fall, then second summer, actual fall, winter, fool spring, second winter, spring of deception, third winter, pollination, and finally spring. Now, depending on what coat you grab tonight, or the temperature on your thermostat, we are somewhere between pollination and spring. On Wednesday, the temperature hit nearly 80 degrees, and I was sweating, even with the AC on, cooking for my first night Seder. Last night, for the second night Seder, I needed tights and a sweater. Today, it's somewhere in between. Our human relationship to or obsession with the weather is not new. We mortals are incredibly sensitive to temperature. When we ask you to fill out surveys after the high holy days, you would not believe how many comments we get that the sanctuary is too cold, too hot and too cold. It's why newborn babies are dressed for winter year-round. They are born fragile, not yet knowing how to regulate their own internal temperature. But no matter how old we get, we are susceptible to the elements. Hypothermia, heat stroke, sunburn. We're actually designed to be aware of our surroundings. Now today, all of our modern conveniences allow us to exist in a comfortable climate, no matter the season. But the rabbis of old and the authors of our prayer book wanted to be sure that no matter how much we're able to advance, and no matter how far we might live from the land of Israel, we would remain connected to our homeland and to its seasons. Passover is known as Chag HaAviv, the spring holiday. And if you've ever spent Passover in Israel, you know that it's true. It is downright warm. The rain has stopped and the flowers are blooming. Here too, despite the micro-seasons we experience, we are certainly moving into spring. And our liturgy picks up on this theme. On the first day of Passover, we begin praying for a change in our weather. Not as rain, as we do on Sukkot, not for our crops to grow, as we do on Shavuot, but for dew. We pray for dew. It's a curious prayer for a curious phenomenon. Dew is essentially water in the form of droplets that appear on thin, exposed objects in the morning or in the evening due to condensation. Scientifically, and I quote, "As the exposed surface cools by radiating its heat, atmospheric moisture condenses at a rate greater than which it can evaporate, resulting in the formulation of water drops. When temperatures get low, the dew takes the form of ice, like frost. But because dew is regulated to the temperature of surfaces, in late summer it forms most easily on surfaces that are not warmed, like our grass, our leaves, maybe the roof of your car when it's been sitting out all day, and on bridges. But dew is something that is fleeting. If you wake up too late in the morning, the dew that was decorating your lawn will have been absorbed into the warm air. It's actually almost impossible to photograph. When I put dew into my search bar for a photo, AI did present me with many photos of dew on leaves, but it's actually really, really hard to get an actual photo of dew. You see, it's interesting that something so seemingly random that the rabbis would include a prayer for this. In fact, in our Amidah, every time we say it, between Passover and Sukkot, we're supposed to pray for dew. There is a spiritual dimension to this. The Hebrew word tal, or dew, appears 34 times in our Hebrew Bible. It's used poetically and symbolically to reflect the idea that precipitation is a form of God's blessings. In the book of Deuteronomy, God explicitly warns the Israelites that the presence of rain for their crops and their cattle is actually given as a form of for the observance, of God's commandments. In the book of Psalms, in the same chapter, where we hear that famous saying, "Hine ma tov u'ma na'im," how good it is, how pleasant it is for people, brothers and sisters, to dwell in unity, that same verse goes on to compare that caring sibling relationship to the dew that's found on mountains in Israel, Hermon and Sion. And it is there that God will ordain blessing and everlasting life. The traditional blessing for dew is recited on the first day of Passover during the repetition of the Amidah. In some communities, this prayer is recited with the rabbi or the cantor wearing a kittel, a white robe that is traditionally worn on the high holy days. Given the significance of rain and dew for the survival of ancient Israelites, the comparison to the high holy days, when Jews pray for another year of life and sustenance, is apt. The text of this Tfilat Hatal, the prayer for dew, takes the form of a liturgical poem or a piyut. It was written by a 6th century CE Hebrew poet, Eliezer Kalir. The prayer concludes by praising God as one who causes winds to blow and dew to fall, and makes 3 requests: for blessing and not for curse, for life and not for death, for abundance and not for famine. Now, given the climate of the Middle East, we wonder, why would the rabbis construct our prayers in such a way that we pray for dew half the year and rain the other half of the year? I'm sure there's a meteorological answer, but the spiritual one is that we actually need to pay attention. The rain always catches our attention. The pitter-patter, as you can hear it on windows or on our cars, that sound of sheets of rain falling. But dew, on the other hand, is silent. It doesn't draw attention to itself at all. It is the most humble, unassuming form of rain, never causing damage, gentle, nourishing, and dependable. I said this earlier in our service, but depending on how Passover falls, the Shabbat during Passover can be as late as the 6th day, or in the case of this year, as early as the 3rd day. I'm guessing that you're not quite tired of your Seder leftovers yet. You'd probably eat matzah brai another day or two. Your house may still be full of people, or at least the laundry they left behind, and the shine of the Chag has yet to tarnish. And yet the world still feels as painful as it did before we asked those 4 questions this year. We are still at war. Service people are being injured and dying protecting us. Our family in Israel, many of them held their seders in safe rooms for fear of sirens. And the news in Washington and around the world continues, irrespective of holy days. We are desperate for the rebirth and renewal that this season promises, and yet we look around to see a world virtually unchanged. I think this is why we need to pray for dew in these days. Because we can't just look for the broad strokes of rainstorms. We have to try and pay attention to the tiny droplets of dew, which we'll miss if we're not really looking for them. There's a midrash which wonders why Moses was the person who noticed the burning bush with God's presence coming from within it. The rabbis say that many other people walked past the same bush. They noticed the fire, but they didn't notice that the bush was not consumed by the fire. It was only Moses who was aware enough to look down and to notice that this was no ordinary occurrence. And so too with dew. When we go out to get the morning paper, if we still do things like that, to bring the garbage cans in, to leave the house to walk the dog. The do is there. The question is, do we notice it? Do we notice the news stories that are positive and good? Do we just notice the ones that make our blood boil? Do we see the flowers shooting out of the ground? Did you smell that smell of the fresh dirt that was just laid on the flower beds as you walked up the hill here? Last night, or the night before at your Seders, were you able to appreciate maybe the small people around the table who spilled the wine on your nice white tablecloth, who ran around, who didn't even make it through the Seder like mine? Did we find moments of peace? Are we looking for the joy? Did we find moments that we could say, Dayenu? It would have been enough. I think this prayer for do is actually a prayer for awareness, that we might ask God to help us to notice the tiny little things in life and to never become complacent to their ordinary presence. The do of understanding and patience rather than the reins of reactivity and blame. The do of listening and learning rather than the barren earth of just being right. The do of compassion for others rather than the monsoons of ignorance and bigotry. The do that sees every one of us as made in God's image, and the do that allows for the fullness of God's creation. Dear God, on this Shabbat, during this Passover season, we ask you to bring us dew, to bring us spring, and to let it last more than just a couple of weeks, and to really bring us the awareness, to notice the blessings that you grant in these moments of our lives, and in every moment, if we're only paying attention. Chag Sameach, Moadim L'Simcha, and Shabbat Shalom, everyone.